Harlem, New York, Monday, June 17th, 1935, 9:36 p.m. Harlem was fading after a hot day. But Harlem didn't sink into the night like other parts of Manhattan. It changed its rhythm. Streetlights came on, casting thin golden shadows on the sidewalks. Jazz music drifted from a half-closed door. Laughter, clinking glasses, hurried footsteps. And then, there was something else. Something only those who had lived here long enough would recognize. Order, not police order. The police were there, but they didn't decide how Harlem operated. Order in Harlem was decided by people not in uniform. Harlem had unwritten rules, and those unwritten rules were enforced. 9:38 p.m. A dark-colored car rolled slowly down Lenox Avenue. 3 Italians were in the car, wearing long coats and soft hats, a style of dress not typical of Harlem. The man in the back seat looked out the window, his eyes scanning whose establishment it was, which corner had a guard, which alley was easy to escape through. He turned to the man beside him and whispered in a heavy Italian accent, "It's just Harlem." But the words had barely left his lips when the driver tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Because Harlem wasn't just Harlem. In Harlem, people knew who was coming, even before they realized they were invisible. 1:42. The car stopped on a dimly lit street. Across the street, a dark-skinned man stood leaning against a lamppost, unpretentious, no bodyguards, just a figure in a dark suit, a fedora, hands in his coat pockets as if waiting for a pre-arranged conversation. The Italian got out. One of them, presumably the speaker, approached. Before he could speak, the black man stared directly at him. "You're lost." Not a question, not a suggestion, a conclusion. The Italian gave a wry smile, trying to maintain his superiority. "We just stopped by. We want to do business." The man's expression remained unchanged. "Harlem isn't for sale." 21:44. The Italian was silent for a second. Just a second. But in the underworld, that 1 second was enough to understand this wasn't a conversation with a henchman. This was a conversation with a lineman. His name was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. A man doing something many white men wouldn't accept, standing still, looking straight ahead and saying no. And what made the Italian Mafia start to take notice wasn't that he was loud, but because he said no while he was still alive. Harlem, Friday, June 28th, 1935. 19. Late at night was when Harlem made money. Money from music, from alcohol, from gambling, and from the biggest thing of all, numbers games. That was the heartbeat of Harlem. A game that was both the hope and the bank of the poor, where they deposited a few cents to dream of a better day. Wikipedia. And that's why Dutch Schultz craved it. Dutch Schultz, the white mob boss from the Bronx, entered Harlem like one enters a convenience store, intake and out. He sent men throughout Harlem, cracking down on those who refused to pay protection money. Anyone who objected was beaten. Anyone who stood firm disappeared. In a room on the second floor where the window overlooked the street, a woman sat upright, like a queen. Stephanie St. Clair, numbers queen. Beside her was Bumpy Johnson, then still her right-hand man, her problem solver. News of Schultz arrived quickly, and St. Clair didn't tremble. She spoke a single sentence slowly and clearly. "Harlem doesn't pay robbers." Schultz wanted to use violence to teach Harlem a lesson. But Schultz didn't understand one thing. Harlem had been taught enough by life. It wasn't easy for it to learn another lesson from some outsider. 0041. Bumpy walked out of the room. He didn't carry his ostentatious gun. He wasn't with a group. He went down the stairs alone. And that night, what Bumpy did, what made the Italian Mafia begin to respect him, wasn't to kill anyone. He did something harder, to keep Harlem from falling into chaos even as war was coming. Because if Harlem fell into chaos, the Italian Mafia would have an excuse to go in and quell it. And once they were in, they wouldn't leave. Bumpy understood that. He maintained order with brief conversations, subtle warnings. Looks cold enough for people to understand on their own. Schultz could bring guns, but Bumpy brought what Schultz lacked: discipline. Harlem, Wednesday, July 10th, 1935, 7:12 p.m. The Italian Mafia didn't respect Harlem for its morality. They respected it for its effectiveness. And Harlem under Bumpy began to show that effectiveness. Schultz attacked. Harlem didn't fall. Schultz threatened. Harlem didn't run. St. Clair and Bumpy retaliated in the way Schultz hated most. Not by shooting in the street, but by making Schultz lose money. At times, shops that did business with Schultz were vandalized, their signs smashed, and their power lines cut. At other times, the police received the right tips at the right time, disrupting Schultz's operations. Wikipedia. This is what the Italian Mafia saw and remembered. Bumpy didn't engage in childish warfare. Bumpy chose to make his opponents bleed on the books. 7:40 p.m. An Italian, a henchman of a bigger boss, sat in the car, looking at Harlem through the window and saying to his accomplices, "It makes Harlem look like a company." Harlem, a company. It sounds funny, but in this world, it's a compliment. Because company means a system, people in charge, laws, and most importantly, people who keep their word. Bumpy became famous not just for being tough, but because when he said "I promised," he would keep his word. The Italian Mafia respected that. Because in the underworld, keeping a promise is rarer than having a gun. Newark, New Jersey, Wednesday, October 23rd, 1935, 10:58 p.m. The news reached Harlem like a knock on the door in the middle of the night. Dutch Schultz was shot at Palace Chop House in Newark, 11:17 p.m. Bumpy was in Harlem when he heard the news. He wasn't happy. He didn't speak loudly. He was just silent longer than usual. Because Bumpy understood. When Schultz falls, Harlem is not free. Harlem becomes an empty pie. And when there's an empty pie, the Italian Mafia will come. 20 a.m., October 24th, 1935. In Newark, one of Schultz's men died at 2:20 a.m. Schultz was still breathing. In the hospital, Schultz uttered nonsensical rambling words as if being consumed by darkness. And that morning, Schultz died from his wounds. October 24th, 1935. And the moment an agreement was about to begin. Manhattan, Friday, October 25th, 1935, 11:06 a.m. The day Schultz died, Harlem held its breath. The next day, Harlem knew it was about to face something worse. A more organized, colder, and more calculating enemy. The Italian Mafia didn't send a fuss. They didn't need to. They sent an invitation, 11:06 a.m. A neutral location in Manhattan. No sign, no business cards. Bumpy arrived on time. Not too early to appear impatient. Not too late to appear contemptuous. In the room, the Italians didn't curse. No threats. No pointing fingers. They talked about order. Harlem, after Schultz, had to be quiet. Money had to flow. No war that would draw police attention. And then they said what they really wanted. "We'll get our share." A simple statement. But those who understood would see it as a noose. Bumpy looked at them calmly. "You can take your share, but you're not going into Harlem to take it yourselves." The atmosphere in the room changed. 11:18. An old Italian man with an expressionless face asked, "So who's taking it?" Bumpy replied, "I am. This is the incident that earned the respect of the Italian Mafia." Bumpy didn't beg. He didn't flatter. He proposed a model that the Italian Mafia liked best. The Italian Mafia profited. Harlem remained orderly, and Bumpy was in charge. That is, if Harlem had problems, the Italian Mafia didn't have to send in troops. They just needed to call a name. Bumpy became the door. And when you are the door, you don't need to be the biggest. You just need to be something everyone has to go through. Common accounts describe that after Schultz was killed, Bumpy struck a deal with the Mafia to quickly establish an organization in Harlem in exchange for business deals. Harlem, Sunday, October 27th, 1935, 8:33 p.m. Harlem was back to music, but there was a difference. The Italians were starting to appear in a different way. No longer the go-in and take-over type. Instead, it was the walk-by and look type. And if there was a problem, they didn't handle it themselves. They asked the doorman. This is repeated in many popular accounts of Harlem after the St. Clair versus Schultz period. Bumpy mediated with Luciano Mafia and outsiders wanting to settle matters in Harlem had to go through him because the Harlem War was bad for business. 41 p.m. An Italian henchman told a Harlem resident, "If you want peace, tell Bumpy," not demanding to see the Italian boss, not asking permission from the family. But Bumpy, for a black person in New York at that time, this wasn't just any ordinary power. It was something akin to recognition. The Italian Mafia didn't do this because they were good. They did it because they saw. Bumpy kept Harlem quiet. Bumpy made money run. Bumpy knew his limits. And Bumpy didn't let emotions ruin his plans. The Italian Mafia respected him in the Italian Mafia's way. No arm swapping, no flowers. They respected him by not breaking his rules in the area he controlled. And from that, Harlem had a new truth. The Italian Mafia might be more powerful, but in Harlem, they went through the door named Bumpy Johnson.